everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. We are going to talk about how to start, grow, and protect your online business. So to introduce myself, my name is Ashlee Campbell, and I'm the founder of Summit Collaborations. We are a full-service marketing web design agency based in Tampa, Florida. We serve clients across the country, including those in areas of financial service, legal, technology, coaching, e-commerce, and many more. No matter what industry you're in, we help businesses clarify their message and reach their target audience through different means of marketing.
And I'm DiAngelo. I'm a trademark and business attorney and the founder of DiAngelo Law. We're actually turning 5 next week, so I'm super excited for that. And we are launching our podcast on the same day. It's called Make a Seat, and it's about entrepreneurial tips sprinkled with legal nuggets, so I hope that you guys check it out. And we serve clients all around the country, representing them with their trademark matters. And we also have a wide range of clients and a lot of online businesses. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys today about ways to protect and grow your online business.
Awesome. So with that being said, a few things that we'll cover today in our webinar all really go with how to lay the foundation for long-term growth and success of your business. So everything that we talk about is really needed in the beginning stages of your business to help you with long-term success. So we're going to cover how to find your target audience, how to handle branding basics for your new business, name your brand, what trademark protection is, why you need it, what kind of business formation you should use for your business, a few marketing techniques that you can make actionable, and then how to establish the appropriate contracts and a few social media regulations to consider.
Yeah, so there's a reason that we do these webinars together, right? Like you can go take a webinar about marketing or branding, and you can take a webinar probably about legal matters as well. I'm sure you can find some out there. But we do it together because these topics are inherently intertwined, okay? You need both to have a successful business. Marketing and branding without the protection just leaves you so exposed to either a rebrand or financial trouble or things like that. And on the other hand, if you're going to go through the process of protecting your business, you want to make sure that it's profitable and you have the right branding and marketing tools to make money, right? To make a living and for this to be your livelihood. So that's why we do these together. And I think you guys will see as we talk about it that it all is really intertwined, and one thing doesn't necessarily come before the other. There's a couple exceptions that we'll talk about, but really it's something that you guys need to be thinking about continuously and as a cohesive concept, not just like marketing, branding over here, legal over here, all intertwined, okay?
Yeah, good point, Erica. We tried to structure the webinar for you in a way that made the most sense. If you were thinking about starting your business, a few things that you should try to consider first. But like Erica said, these are all things that is an ever-living organism that you really need to pay attention to and nurture all the way through the process. So with that being said, we will get started. We will jump into branding basics for your business. So a strategy, every good brand starts, or any good thing for that matter, starts with a strategy. And so a strategy really helps you differentiate yourself from your competitors, and then in turn helps you improve your brand recognition and customer loyalty. So it also helps you avoid just throwing something at the wall and hoping that it sticks. So your strategy should include information on the who, what, where, when, and how you plan on delivering your brand messaging to your audience. You probably started your business for a reason. Maybe that was because you saw that somebody had a problem and that there wasn't a solution for that problem, or maybe that it was you thought that you could provide a better one. So what we like to start our strategy with is the who. So the who of your brand strategy really means understanding your target audience. And maybe you started with a target audience in mind. So again, maybe you started your business because a certain group of people were lacking a solution to a problem that they had. Or maybe, you decided to start a marketing agency and realized that everybody was, any business owner was your target audience. And so really defining who that is the start of, a good brand strategy. So as I go through these slides, you'll see some different examples in this strategy of who we call Sample Sally. And so it really goes through and paints this great picture of who she is. And this is something that we help our clients with whenever we're working with them to start up their business. And so you really want to bring this person to life, and you want to know everything from what their spouse's name is to what shelf they shop on and look at in a store. Obviously, their job title, education level, income, all of the basics of who you think your audience is. So again, bring them to life, write a description about them, actually, tell about their life story and kind of how they got to where they are right now that they're interested in using your products or services. Understanding their pain points is really, really important when you're, developing your own brand strategy. And that's just because you want to know how you can help them solve their problems. So definitely a big one to look at there. Other than pain points, you want to know what their beliefs are. So what are their action beliefs? What do they want out of your services or your product? And what are their inaction beliefs? What do they believe will happen if they don't take action? What will happen if they don't use your product or service? Another thing to look at is their triggering events. So what caused them to take action in the first place? Was it something that wasn't working in the past that they believed was a solution to this problem? Or was it something else? Noise is what are they seeing and hearing in the marketplace. So you need to know exactly what your competitors are doing and what your target audience is already seeing. So are they seeing and hearing something that is completely different than what you are providing them? And if so, how do you really help them understand that what you're doing is the right solution for the problem that they're facing? Another thing that you want to do in your brand strategy as you're getting to know your target audience is you want to know what gives you authority with this specific audience. Why should they trust you? And what is it that gives you credibility over everybody else? And then once you have all of those established, then you can go through the awareness stages. The customer journey, starting with the awareness stage. And so that is, maybe they don't know that they have a problem. It's not even on top of their mind, but it's there. They just don't know it yet. And so now you're starting to bring awareness to that problem through education. And then once they're educated on the fact that they have a problem, now they're in the consideration phase where they need potentially a fix to this problem. They don't know what that fix is yet, but you're again going to educate them on what that is through your messaging. And then 3, the decision stage, you need to walk this person through awareness, consideration, all the way up until decision. And then that's when you will get them to become a paying client or customer. So in the beginning, when business is new and we're really excited about this new baby that we have, we're really happy to, excited to jump into the naming side of our business, or creating a website or a logo or all of these wonderful basic branding elements, including logos, fonts, colors, websites, all of that. But really it's important to wait until you've learned who your target audience is. You want to know their needs, wants, habits. This way you know how to better market to them. And then once you know them, then you can start working on these items. But first, before the logo and the website and the colors, you really want to focus on your name. And Erica will tell you why.
All right. I couldn't unmute myself for a second there. So thank you, Ashlee. Yeah, in the beginning, I mentioned that all of these things kind of go together simultaneously. And for the most part, that's true. And you always want to keep your client avatar in mind, but you really need to make sure you're doing that first and foremost. Of course, things could change. You could pivot. You could realize that maybe you're not, maybe you want to change your target audience and your sample Sally, and that's fine. But really that needs to be first and foremost, even before naming, even before forming your business, before everything. So once you have Sample Sally or your version thereof narrowed down and you're figuring out your strategy, the next thing you want to do is naming. So you're going to have the branding perspective of naming, but also the legal perspective of naming. When it comes to naming, you want to have a name that's strong on the trademark spectrum. The trademark spectrum goes generic, descriptive, suggestive, arbitrary, and fanciful. So those are basically classifications of trademark names, of the strength of a name. So the higher it is on the spectrum, the more distinctive it is. And when you're thinking about these names, you want it to have three things. You want it to be distinctive, you want it to be protectable, and you want to be not infringing on somebody. So the first part, the trademark spectrum we were just talking about, that's going to tell you whether your mark is distinctive and protectable, because generic names are not protectable. If you had a coffee shop, for example, name the coffee shop, you're not going to be able to protect it, right? Because you don't have any exclusive rights to call your, your coffee shop the coffee shop and be the only one. However, if it's descriptive, that's a little bit of a different story. So if it's descriptive, you might still be able to have it protected, but you might not. So it's never like a good place to aim for. You always want to aim for suggestive or higher. And I actually have a blog post, you guys, on my website, DiAngeloLaw.com, that I would recommend looking at for more in-depth information about the trademark spectrum and trying to figure out, where you want to be on that spectrum, how to make sure it's suggestive rather than descriptive. Sometimes it's a really fine line, okay? So you want to make sure that you're all the way to the suggestive side, or arbitrary or fanciful. And when it comes to marks that are descriptive, what happens is, yes, you can get trademark protection, but only on the supplemental register. So there's a difference between the supplemental and the principal register when you apply for a trademark. And you always want the principal register. That's the main one. That's the one pretty much most people only have ever heard of. And that's what gives you all the rights. When you're on the supplemental register, you still get to use the R with the circle around it. You still get some of the rights, but if you ever end up in a dispute, you're going to have a higher burden of proof to show that you're the rightful owner of this. Whereas if you're on the principal mark, you get like almost a presumption that you own the mark. But the good news is if you do fall into the descriptive category, after 5 years, you can then amend and try to get on the principal register. So sometimes the short-term solution to acquire distinctiveness, like Best Buy, for example, they used to be considered descriptive. And then they proved that, hey, people know who we are. They know our brand. So they were able to then get onto the principal register. So the other parts that we talked about, distinctive, protectable, non-infringing. The next part is a trademark search. And this is what's going to cover the protectable and not infringement part of those three things that you want to have when it comes to naming. And a trademark search is not Google. It is not TESS, which is the USPTO's website. TESS is a great place to start as you're brainstorming, because if you type in TESS search on Google or any search engine, it'll take you to a trademark website, but it's really only going to search exact matches. And that's not the standard when it comes to what you can protect with a trademark. And it's also not the Secretary of State. I get calls a lot where people say, oh, I just registered my LLC, and then I found out somebody else has the same name in another state. And I tell them that is totally irrelevant. That really has nothing to do with your rights to be using this name. And it doesn't mean that one of you guys has superior rights over the other. Trademark is completely separate from the name that you file with your Secretary of State for your LLC or corporation, or even a DBA or fictitious name. So what happens is you need to get with a lawyer who has the right software and the right tools for you guys to actually determine what your protectability and your risk level is. So for example, I have software that's similar to what the trademark office uses, and it's going to search things that are actually the standard of confusion: sound, sight, and meaning. So just because one word isn't exactly the same as another, that doesn't mean that it's not a conflict, okay? And it even goes as far as foreign equivalents. So in this example that I put here in the slide, blue sea and mar azul are foreign equivalents, okay? That is not allowed simultaneously. For trademark purposes, those are identical trademarks. So if you went to TESS or you went to Google and you typed in blue sea and you didn't find anything that was similar to your product or service or your online brand, that doesn't mean that it's okay, because you're not sitting there searching Mar Azul, or you're not searching other languages that have the same one, but that's really the standard that you need to be thinking about it. So if you were going to try to manually search yourself, you'd be there all day trying to see if there's a name, and then even then you don't know what it's going to be. or if you're going to get a refusal when you do get to the trademark part of the process. So I definitely recommend you guys, when you get to the naming side, take into consideration who your client avatar is, take into consider the trademark spectrum as you're brainstorming and you're choosing names that are possibilities. Try not to get too attached to a name. I see this every single day. And a lot of times I have to break it to people who didn't get a search and they just applied for the trademark. And the answer is you have to rebrand. So try not to get attached before you get the trademark search. And then you know at that point what your risk level is. If it's low, you can feel comfortable going to the next stage and then maybe getting somewhat attached to the name. But you know, it's funny, and Ashlee and I were talking about this earlier, is, you know, when people do have this attachment to their names and their brand names, I get it. But on the other hand, other people, your ideal client, they don't care. So for example, there's Blenders sunglasses, and there's also a brand called Shady Rays. Those are two completely different names. They're kind of similar price points, similar brands overall, but nobody's buying Blenders because they're called Blenders, and nobody's buying Shady Rays because they're called Shady Rays, right? So even though it seems like important to you, just picking a name that meets all these criteria and it resonates with your target audience is what's important, okay? So I know I touched a little bit on trademark registration, but I'm going to go a little bit more in depth because it really is important. It's one of the most important things that you can do when you are starting an online business. In online businesses, you are putting yourself out there globally. There are more eyes on you than a brick and mortar business. There's, you know, your ability to use your trademarks online is super important, right? Because that's where your business lives. So I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth into trademarks. So first of all, for those of you who don't know, what is a trademark? Your trademark is what consumers use to identify your brand to customers. So this can be your name, most importantly. That's how people are going to refer to you. So even though, you know, Ashlee mentioned that when it comes to branding, you have these things like logos and colors and all that. That's not the most important thing. I mean, it's really good because you want it to all be cohesive, but all of the messaging and branding and marketing that you're putting out is attached to your name. So that's how people are going to discuss you. That's how they're going to communicate about you, is your name. So that's the most important trademark. You know, your logo, slogan, and other ways that consumers recognize you. One example of a smell is if you ever walk into a Hilton chain, they all smell exactly the same. That is Hilton's trademark smell. And you can do this in a lot of different ways. There's pretzels that come in some unique shape, right? Every single time, and that's their trade dress, basically. So you're able to get that trademarked as well. But for us today, talking about online businesses, it's pretty much going to be your name, logo, and maybe a slogan. However, if you have additional product lines or verticals, or even a podcast, those also need separate trademark registration. So if you're like a coach, for example, an online business coach, and then you also sell a course that has a different name, and you have a podcast to talk about important business matters, or, you know, to talk about coaching, that probably has a different name as well. So all three of those things would require the same naming process and a trademark. And I put on here, you know, why you need to register your trademark. Other than the things that we just talked about, you really don't want consumers to be confused. And I know it sounds like, how can consumers confuse me? But the internet is inundated with information and people, and you know, you might get a glimpse, maybe someone's scrolling through and they see a social media ad, like an Instagram ad, right? And they see the name and they're like, oh, okay, this sounds kind of cool, but they keep scrolling. Well, the next time they see it, they might catch it. But if they're confusing you with somebody else, I mean, that's going to be a problem. And it's a problem because, one, they could be accidentally purchasing from this other person after they've already seen you for all these times. But more scarily, if the other person that they're confusing you with has poor service, or somebody's talking about it verbally and they mention the wrong name, that damages your reputation. But on a more positive note, the reasons to register your trademark are the social media and domain name advantages. If somebody is infringing on your name on social media, you can actually email Facebook, email Instagram, and ask for your social media handle back. And in most instances, they'll give it to you. Now, of course, there's examples where somebody can have the same name as you if they're in a completely different industry and they got it first. But if somebody's actually infringing you and potentially confusing customers, they will change it for you. And domain name ownership is also something that trademarks can help you with. So it's a similar situation, right? People can have a domain name that has the same name as you if they're not using it for the same types of products. So, but if you just have like sallythecoach.com and somebody's using it for like a baseball coaching platform, okay, that's fine. But if they actually start using it for coaching services and you have Sally the Coach trademark, you can file a claim and make them basically stop using it and give it back to you. It also helps avoid copycats, and Amazon brand registry requires it. So if you guys are considering that type of online business where you're going to sell products on Amazon, they require that to get on the brand registry, and they have a very specific criteria for what type of trademark. You have to be on the principal register, and it has to look a certain way, and yada yada. So that's something to consider. But you know what? What's worse than, I guess what's better than all these positive benefits is avoiding the consequences. So if you are accidentally infringing on somebody else's trademark because you didn't bother with the search, or you just like didn't think they were going to do anything about it because you're small, well, they can actually sue you. And not only can they collect any damages for confusion, now the law is now they can actually collect your profits that you earned from using that name. Okay. And even if they don't get that far, you're going to end up in a legal battle if somebody's, if you're infringing on somebody and they actually do something about it, which is in itself expensive. And more than likely, if they were there first and they have a trademark registration, you're going to be forced to rebrand and rename. And it's much more cost effective and easier to change your name in the beginning than it is after you've been years into your business. And then you have to somehow get all your clientele or your customers to realize that it's still you. And yeah, it's not an ideal situation. So if you guys do it right on the front end or as soon as possible, it's definitely going to be better. And just a few other things. Lack of IP assets to sell, expand, or franchise. When you have your trademark, those are things that you can use as leverage. If you have a weak mark, more and more people can show up in the marketplace using similar names. So you don't want to do that and skip the trademark spectrum part. And you also, don't want to lose your social media handles. So this is kind of something that we're going to talk about a little bit more in depth later, but just preliminarily, you guys, if you're already in the market, if you guys have already started an online business, I definitely recommend, doing the whole search process if you haven't done it already. But in either way, start using the TM symbol. That puts people on notice that you're claiming ownership of your trademark, and it acts as a deterrent for potential copycatters. Most of the time, people who have your name are not doing it on purpose, but there are a lot of people who are just like, oh, I like that. They're not going to do anything about it, and they will copy you. So use a TM, it'll be a deterrent. And once you get actual trademark registration, you can use the R. And then later on, you'll want to monitor your trademark, send out the cease and desist. Trust me, you're doing both yourself and the other person a favor by doing it. Nip it in the bud early so it doesn't become an issue or just a dispute. And you'll be consistent with this. Make sure that, you're investing into a brand. Like if you guys are taking this seriously and this is like your future, this is the business, this is your livelihood, you really need to take it seriously and be consistent, making sure you're monitoring, making sure you're not letting people infringe on you. And then if anything does come up, in addition to the cease and desist letters, you know, you can also go the route of contacting Facebook and Instagram. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but we're going to touch on forming a business. So, you know, we just got to this now. We've talked about a lot already. We talked about, you know, branding and finding your client avatar and naming and trademarking. And we're just now getting to entities. And I know that doesn't sound, you know, necessarily intuitive. A lot of people just like form an LLC, ready to go. Like they just pick a name out of the air, form that LLC. That's not really the way to go. But the good news is the name of your LLC or your corporation doesn't really matter. It's pretty much irrelevant because, like I mentioned, that doesn't give you any trademark protection. So you could always name your LLC or corporation after yourself if you wanted to, and then do business as whatever trademark it is that makes the most sense. That's going to resonate with your client avatar, that's protectable and distinct on the trademark spectrum, and that got cleared on the comprehensive trademark search, okay? And when we are talking about entities though, LLC for online businesses, generally speaking, is the best way to go, okay? I'm sure you've heard that rumor. It's kind of true, but if you're thinking about a corporation, corporations make sense when your long-term goal is big. If you're planning on creating this like tech startup and you want to sell it down the road, or if you're going to have a bunch of investors and founders, you want to have a little bit more wiggle room in how you can structure the business and give out shares and all these things. Maybe that makes sense for you to have a corporation. But otherwise, an LLC gives you leeway, both for tax purposes and liability purposes. But you can't just form an LLC and expect that you're protected from all your actions, especially if you're an online business providing a service and it's you providing that service. If something goes wrong, they could easily come after you directly and try to, you know, quote unquote, pierce the corporate veil, or there's all these kinds of things that they can do. So you want to just make sure if you do choose an LLC that you're managing it like a business and not like your personal piggy bank, and you're not commingling things and basically acting like the LLC is your alter ego. I don't really recommend doing too much work as a sole proprietorship. It's not the worst thing ever if you just are trying to get started and you don't form a business and you just, you know, want to get going and have your website up. But if you actually start to make money, you're going to want another business because of tax purposes. Because if all you're doing is collecting money, you're going to have to pay self-employment tax and all kinds of things. I'm not a tax accountant. I'm not a tax attorney. You should seek one. But, you know, that is the other side of the considerations. And a lot of people say, should I get an LLC or an S Corp? But that's the wrong question. LLCs, S Corp is in its own entity, and S Corp is a tax election. So you can be an LLC and be an S Corp, or you can be a corporation and be an S Corp if you meet the criteria, okay? And so that's another question that you're gonna want to ask your accountant or a tax attorney. And it's situational, you know, it depends on what your financial situation is, how much your business is making, and all of those things. But what really matters when you're figuring out your formation is going to be your internal documents and the way you manage the business, more so than whether you have an LLC or a corporation.
All right. So now Erica's went through all of the naming considerations, how to get trademarked, what to get trademarked, you know, how to get your business set up legally, and kind of what considerations there. And we also know how to better understand your audience so that we can market to them. So with that being said, now we'll move on to the latter part of the overall branding and marketing strategy. So, you know, the how, the what, where, when, that sort of thing. So not only is this a time that you can start focusing on the brand design elements that we talked about earlier, like your logos and fonts and things of that nature, but now you can also focus on other branding fundamentals such as your messaging, which is extremely important. So this is where you decide how you're going to incorporate your overall audience that you want to reach, plus that name and your slogan perhaps, and turn that into just an overall brand message. And so what is going to really reach or impact your audience to the point that they want to buy your product or service? So at every stage of the game, whether you're early on in your business or you've been around for 5 years, it's really important to communicate as clearly and as effectively as possible. If you don't do this, then it doesn't matter how good or, good or bad your product is. If your audience doesn't know from looking at a website or looking at your product packaging exactly what it is that your service or, product does for them, they're never going to try it. They want things given to them as easily as possible, which is why they probably are looking for a solution in the first place. And so it's super important that this is very clearly communicated in your brand messaging and communicated across all different aspects. So again, your brand messaging is going to be on everything. It's going to be on something as small as your business cards and as large as your website. So being really consistent with that is also extremely important. So some of the things that you want to define in this, the what phase is your brand promise. So your brand promise is an experience that your audience can expect every single time that they interact with you. So maybe your promise is answering emails within 4 hours. If you don't answer an email within 4 hours, you've broken your brand promise. And that's one of the fundamental pieces of your brand strategy. You always want to make sure if you are promising something, if you've told your audience and target market that they can expect something from you, then you need to make sure that you're carrying through with that. The next thing that you're going to define is your positioning statement. And so that means how you fill a particular need in the market. If you are like me as a marketing agency, then there are a lot of us. And so I need to explain to my clients that I can act as their virtual CMO and their entire marketing team. I need them to know exactly how we are different than other agencies out there. And Erica would need to do the same for her business. Why is she different? And she's a virtual law firm. And so she can help business owners across the country or world. She doesn't have to be in front of them. So these things make us a little bit unique. And the next thing you're going to want to define is your primary message. So essentially, if you're going out and marketing to anybody, whether that be in a networking event in person, or maybe, a potential client is talking to you on the phone, you need to know your 30-second elevator pitch. And this is the primary message that is going to tell as much valuable information about your brand that you can within 30 seconds. But more importantly, you're trying to capture the attention of your audience and explain to them just how you can help them and solve the actual needs and wants that they have. So you really just want to inspire and persuade them to use your product or service. So the next thing you want to define is your brand pillars. So these are a few things, typically 3 to 5, of your specific strengths that your company or brand has. And again, what differentiates you from the rest of the people in your industry. And then the next thing is a call to action. And so what do you want your audience to do? This is another thing, again, in the beginning we talked about they want something as easily as possible. This is something that you don't want to have to make them work for. If they don't know what action you want them to take with your brand, they're not going to take it. They're here and they're working with you or trying to work with you for your help. They need something from you. They want you to take something off of their plate. And so they don't want to they don't want to think more. So if you've ever heard Donald Miller's story branding, whether it's read his book, his podcast, or course, he always talks about surviving and thriving. So people come to you because first they want to survive, but more importantly, they want to thrive. So how can we just initially come to them and help them thrive? And again, it's making them not work for, as much. So next, after we have the how and the what, we're going to go to the where. And so this goes back to all of that research that you did with your audience personas in the beginning. And by the way, I say audience personas, and some people may call this, there are numerous different things out there, brand avatars or client avatars or something like that. So same thing here as I'm talking about that. But going back to audience persona, we talked about where are they looking on a shelf? Like, where are they spending their time? Is it a mom who goes to Target and is often in the toy aisle? Maybe if you have a physical product, you want to be on an end cap in a store like that in front of a toy aisle. Or maybe your target audience is on Facebook or, online networking events or in-person networking events. There's so many different places that our audience can live. And this is one of the big things that we want to focus on as we're building out that brand strategy. So definitely think about on and offline. even if your business is online, maybe if you have an online coaching platform that you're using, an online coaching business, but you know, again, that maybe your target audience goes to a yoga studio in, you know, a specific town. So maybe you do some sort of print marketing in an area like that. So definitely, even if you're, you know, a brick and mortar or an online business, think of both aspects that you can be marketing on. With the where also comes the how. So depending on where your audience lives will depend on how you market to them. So, you know, if you're going direct to consumer, you might have point of purchase displays, which would be things like end caps at stores. Maybe you do commercials or billboards or social media. Maybe you do co-op promos with other partners or email marketing. There's a lot of different ways that we can reach an end consumer. If you're trying to reach other businesses, there's also a lot of ways that you can reach them. So maybe that includes networking events or conferences, maybe even going door-to-door sales, cold calling, more email marketing. You know, there are a lot of different ways to reach our audience, and again, goes back to all of that research that you've done on kind of where they live and spend time and why they need your services in the first place. So an important thing to think about is what kind of marketing material you need to make this happen. And because of that marketing material, whether that be paid ads or business cards, costs money. And you know, again, like Erica was saying, if you're spending all of this time on all of this branding material, make sure that it's protected. That way you don't have to go back and rebrand later and spend more money. But also it's important to just not spend time or money where it doesn't matter. So that's, again, knowing why and where your audience spends their time. So if your audience is 65 years old, and that's your primary audience space, maybe Facebook advertising or Google advertising or text message marketing isn't the place to go, but maybe advertising in the local newspaper or a magazine that is read by that audience would be a better approach. So just, again, be cognizant of where you're spending your time and your money, because in the beginning especially, that can be limited. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some marketing techniques. And the first one that you see here is grassroots marketing. So grassroots marketing is not as easy to do right now because of COVID, and so a lot of us are locked indoors. But whenever the world does open back up, this is a great opportunity to go door to door and get out into your local community and spread your message and your business that way. So, you know, this could be as simple as, if you are a moving company, going door to door to your local storage facilities and trying to just make in-person relationships with them, kind of, you know, beating the pavement and getting out there and doing that typical, you know, salesman type job. The next would be a for cause campaign. This is great whether you are an online business or a brick and mortar. For cause campaigns essentially mean partnering with a nonprofit or some kind of entity that does good in the community, and then you partnering with them to help out with that. So maybe that means giving a portion of your profits back to their organization, or maybe it means helping them collect donations at your, you know, business location if you have one. One example with this would be 2 Men in a Truck. They do something every year in the month of May for Mother's Day to help raise domestic violence awareness, and it's called Movers for Mom. And so they set up all kinds of boxes around the community, and then people donate to these boxes, and it's just goods for moms. And so then 2 Men in a Truck, the moving company, goes and picks these boxes up at the end of the month and then deliver them to a domestic violence shelter. So doing things like that is a great way to, one, not only help out in your community, which is important and, you know, something that we all should want and be doing, but also a good way to get your name out there and, you know, to build really great relationships with people in the community. So the next marketing technique that we'll cover today, just briefly, and there's a lot to cover here, but I just wanted to talk about 3 things, is SEO, so search engine optimization. This is something that is talked about a lot, and it definitely doesn't happen overnight. So as you're building your website, it's definitely something to keep in, you know, the back of your head. So whether that means you learning a little bit about SEO or hiring a copywriter to help you with this, but 3 things that are super important are going to be the title tag. So if you're looking at the screen right now, you can see this is a screenshot of what my website pops up on Google. And so the title tag here is going to be what the name of this page is. And so that's super important to have one of your main keywords in your title tag. But more important than that, let the person know as they're Googling your site, what site they will be clicking on. The next thing is going to be your metadata. So this is this small blurb of information that comes in right under the title of your website. So again, you have a very short amount of characters to get across to your message to this person. So what do you do for them, and why should they click on your website over everybody else's that show up on Google? Something that you can't see here is called alt text. And so that is what goes on an image on your website, and that's done through the back end of whatever kind of website platform that you're using. Maybe that's Squarespace or Wix or WordPress. But that is actually a description that you'll put on every single image on your website. And not only does that help your website be ADA compliant, which I'm sure Erica could tell you all about, but it also helps you rank in Google search. So Google also runs, does search engine optimization off of the images on your website as well. So something really important to consider there. That's not the time to take a picture of a book and then tag that as, a marketing strategy. Like, if it is not something, you don't want to say it is something. Google is much smarter than we probably are, and they know when you are trying to trick them. So definitely don't do that. Really, it's meant to be a descriptive way. So back to making sure that you're in compliance with the Disability Act, and that's to make sure that if somebody can't see an image, that their computer can then read to them kind of what they are supposed to be seeing in an image. And so that's kind of the main purpose for that. Other than that, for SEO, you really want to focus on, of course, your website copy. This does not mean that you should go into your website and you should put marketing agency Tampa, marketing agency Tampa, marketing agency Tampa every 3 lines. But what you should do is use this strategically. And so focus each page of your website on one long and short tail keyword, and make sure that you're using it appropriately. Google wants you to write as if you were speaking to a person, not trying to beat their algorithm. So they do, again, know when you're trying to do that. And so they will just completely ignore your efforts, and then it's, just a waste of time. Don't be discouraged if SEO doesn't happen overnight. Typically, you won't really see the results from something like that for about 3 to 6 months, just kind of depending on how much you're doing it. Also, for something like this, the more you update your website, the better. So blogging is really great to help you rank higher in SEO. One, not only for keywords, but Google does like it when we're updating our website and they know that the content is fresh. So the next tactic or technique we will talk about is organic social outreach. So really this just means spending time, again, if this is where your audience lives, spending time on social media. Maybe that's Facebook and Facebook groups, interacting on, if you're trying to grow a podcast, you're going on different podcast guest groups where they're looking actively for guests for their podcast. And then you can do some kind of exchange or something along those lines. Or, there's a Facebook group for everybody. If you like writing, there's absolutely a writing Facebook group out there. So definitely a great place to spend your time and kind of, again, interact with people in that community, or that are looking for your services, or maybe that are just there to help you, kind of grow your business. So the next would be Instagram. So interacting on Instagram Discover feeds is a great place if you're trying to grow your Instagram, to do that organically. And so essentially you would just type in a hashtag where you know that your target audience kind of lives and interacts. So maybe hashtag entrepreneur, and then you get all of these people that are posting, images with that hashtag. And then you can go out and interact with them, knowing that they are, wanting to be targeted for that kind of keyword on Instagram. A great place to just kind of comment, follow different people, and a lot of the times, people will reciprocate that, and so they'll come back on you as well. Speaking of that as well, if you want to be found on an Instagram Discover feed, not saying that if you use a hashtag you will automatically pop up there, but it is possible, and so keep that in mind as you're also posting your own Instagram images. So any hashtags that you would want people to find you on, that's the type of hashtag that you would use on your own post. Another one would be connecting with people on LinkedIn. So, just being genuine. I personally, drives me crazy when people are just selling to me on LinkedIn and trying over and over and over to message me 600 times. And, for me, LinkedIn is a great place to build professional connections, but I don't like to be sold to it. Not to say that nobody responds to those types of things, but be as genuine as possible. Don't just always try to sell somebody. Try to build relationships. Ask them how you can help them, not just how they can help your business. So the last thing that we'll talk about here is paid advertising. And so we're gonna just go really quickly through Google advertising. If you are at the beginning of your business, Google advertising may not be the best for you. And really that all depends what kind of, how much money you're willing to spend on paid advertising. If you have a $300 budget or maybe even a $500 budget, you will see some decent traction out of Google ads if done properly. Google ads is a beast of its own and definitely a lot more difficult to run on your own, in my opinion, than Facebook advertising would be. So kind of one of the main differences between Facebook and Google is that Google is great for immediate search results. So if you know that your client only searches for your business when they have an immediate need, something along the lines of, if their brakes went out in their car, like that is something that somebody needs to fix immediately. So Google search ads for a business that fixes brakes, would do well on there because, it is an immediate need that somebody has. So they see your ad and they click on it. And then, within a few days, they are typically converting into a client. Whereas Facebook on the other side is not an immediate need. It is more of a brand awareness type ad. So if you are okay with somebody, example for me, I'm okay with somebody seeing an ad about marketing, whereas that is not typically a really quick sales funnel. So like, I don't usually have people that say, I need marketing on a Monday, and then they're ready to pull the trigger on a Wednesday, if it's the first time that they thought about it. So if you are okay with brand awareness type ads, then Facebook could be a much more cost-effective avenue for you to go. Google also does brand awareness ads, but typically you can get them cheaper on Facebook depending on what kind of keywords and business that you have. So it really all depends. But so Facebook advertising, since Google is a little bit more expensive and a little bit more intricate, I will spend a little bit of time on just explaining two different types of Facebook ads to you. These are two things that you could go out and technically run on your own and make actionable, as soon as we got off this call. And that would help drive you leads and then help nurture your audience. And so those are the two types of ads that I want to talk to you about today. So lead generation ads are run to a cold audience. So take that, the audience persona that we've built, find them in Facebook through all of the interests that they have, and then target a lead generation ad to them. So you want to promote something that requires them to give you your email so you can build your email list. That might be something like a quiz, an ebook, really any type of lead magnet. Again, you offer them value in exchange for an email. If you run an ad like that, stock images do better. They don't know you yet. They don't want to see your face, nor do they care to see it. If you have a personal brand, it's still okay to use stock images. That is what works better typically for those ads. Now, when we move on to nurture campaigns, that should go directly to your warm audience. So people who already like your Facebook page or people who have visited your website. Those ads should show your face. Now they're on your audience. They like what they saw. Now they want to get to know you. This is where you should promote things like Facebook Lives or webinars, maybe longer posts about your brand story, who you are, how you got to where you are, things of that nature. You'll really want to start building that more personal connection. These two types of ads, in my opinion, should always be ran on Facebook. And by that, I mean daily on Facebook, you should be running both types of ads. So even just $3 behind each ad type, so $6 a day. And then this will continue building your email list and continue nurturing that warm audience. Facebook's a business. Typically, they will only show your organic posts to 1% of your audience. And so by running nurture campaigns to that warm audience, you're able to get in front of them more often. Of course, a third type of campaign, don't run this every day, but when you are ready to sell something, you can run sales campaigns to your warm audience. I highly suggest only running it to your warm audience. If you run it to a cold audience, it's likely to cost you more, and you're less likely to get the conversions that you want. So we've kind of went through a whole lot of things here on the branding and marketing side of things. And so I will end this with when should you do this? You know, when should you work on your brand strategy and your marketing strategy? And the answer is all the time. So you want to be as consistent with your branding as possible. Having a consistent and strong brand leads to more brand equity and loyalty and less confusion in the marketplace. So don't use purple on Facebook and blue on Instagram and green on your website. Make sure that your logos are consistent, your messaging is consistent. And again, this will help you, it'll make something worth protecting with all of the legal tools that Erica is mentioning. And with that, Erica's going to talk a little bit about some of the marketing regulations you should consider as you're going through all of this. Can you unmute yourself, Erica? Hold on, let's see. Technical difficulties, guys. Bear with us.
All right. Trying to keep me quiet. Yeah, thank you for that. And I can tell you guys, you know, I'm going on 5 years next week, and I've wasted so much money trying to do things the wrong way. And one in particular is SEO. I mean, there's just so many SEO predators out there. But what I'm saying was the way to get SEO rankings is copywriting. It's not like some technique, like this magic algorithm technique that's going to get you results overnight. So, you know, that's just one of the many things that I have learned, and I, you know, can appreciate when Ashlee talks about it because I've been there and made those mistakes myself. And then ultimately being genuine and consistent is always the way to go. Whether it's in your marketing strategy or pretty much anything that you're doing. And if you're not being consistent and you're wondering why something's not working, like you just do one newsletter and then you don't follow up with anybody, nothing's going to happen from that one newsletter. There has to be, you know, multiple forms. So I just wanted to, you know, piggyback off what Ashlee was saying and talk about how important consistency is. And that said, when you are putting all these efforts in, you want to make sure that you're doing it the right way, and a way that's not going to get you in trouble. And of course, you know, most of us aren't starting businesses to do things unethically and to do things wrong, right? We want to do it right, but we just are humans and we don't know everything. You know, I always say you don't know what you don't know, and it's very, very true. So that's one of the reasons why we do these webinars, just to kind of educate you and give you enough information so you do know what you don't know. You can make sure that you're educating yourself further with these things. So, you know, one of the really popular ways that online businesses try to promote themselves and gain new audiences is through giveaways. But that can be really dangerous, okay? So with giveaways, there's typically 3 types. There's sweepstakes, contests, and lotteries. And lotteries are actually completely illegal. So you want to make sure you're not accidentally running an illegal lottery, okay? And what that means is a lottery has 3 components. One is a prize, the thing you're giving away. One is a chance that you will win. And the third thing is called consideration. And the legal definition of consideration just means something of value, okay? And it could be money. Most of the time, like if you buy a lottery ticket, that is your consideration. But it can also be things like reviews for your podcast or anything else that's really going to add value to your company. You know, could be considered consideration. And at that point, it becomes an illegal lottery. So you want to make sure that you're, you know, not in that gray area, and definitely not putting on an illegal lottery. Now, it's okay to do contests and sweepstakes, okay? You just want to be careful. A contest, if you're doing something based on merit, like if I give you guys a pop quiz at the end of this thing and I tell you whoever gets the most questions right, I'm going to give you guys a book. Okay, I can do that. That's a contest. All right. But if I just randomly pick a name out of a hat and require you guys to like enter, give me something in consideration, that's a lottery. But if I don't require you to give me anything at all, if I'm just like, all right, everybody who's here today, I'm going to pick a random name, that's probably a sweepstakes. But again, gray area, because am I getting something of value out of you guys being here? I mean, I got your email address. That could be an argument that that's value, but probably not. But again, you don't want to dabble into a gray area and get yourself in trouble for something, you know, like this. And some tips too are, whatever you're doing, if you're going to do a contest or a sweepstakes, avoid doing anything that's worth more than $600 because then tax implications come into play, and really whatever you're trying to accomplish is probably going to be fine under $600. Make sure everyone's 18 and tell them that they have to be 18 to enter. There's so many different regulations about these things from state to state and country to country. But when you're online, you have to cover all your bases everywhere, right? Like that's why online businesses get so tricky, because you're trying to comply with people all over the place, and you have so many more eyes on you, and you don't know who those people are. You don't have a way to monitor or prevent people from, you know, showing up at your store, so to speak, which is your website or your social media. So yeah, the next thing that a lot of people do in online businesses and on social media is promotions and endorsements. And those are fine as long as you don't lie about it and as long as you disclose that as an ad or that you're being sponsored. So if somebody pays you to say something about this brand, you have to disclose it. Somebody gives you a pair of, let's say, yoga pants, and you talk about them online, you have to disclose that that brand gave you those yoga pants, even if they didn't ask you to post about it, okay? And same goes if if it's a family member or you're related to them and you're promoting it, you really should disclose that clear and conspicuously, okay? So like having microscopic little font and little parenthesis, not gonna work. You really need to make sure that you are being upfront about these things, okay? And then the next topic to be careful about is spam, all right? So, you know, we have targeted ads, that's fine. You know, you have email marketing campaigns, that can be fine. But you just wanna make sure that you're doing it right. And the biggest takeaway here is always have an opt-out. I have some girl texting me lately who's selling some essential oils, and she has no opt-out. She just like spams me with these essential oil sales. Like, I'm never going to buy from her, because how rude is that? Okay, I never signed up for it, and she hasn't given me the ability to opt out. So in addition to violating the laws, you're actually kind of annoying people in most instances. There's a right way and a wrong way to do these things, right? Like you can still cold call or cold email in some contexts, like Ashlee mentioned. And that's not necessarily, you don't have to be like a bad person or like a sketchy person to do cold emails. You don't want to spam people, and you really want to make sure that they have the ability to opt out, whether it's through email marketing campaigns or text message marketing campaigns. Sticking with the theme of online marketing and social media marketing, there's some more issues that aren't necessarily regulations, but are relevant when you're doing online marketing. So a lot of it has to do with copyright, okay? So, you know, you want to use those stock images that Ashlee was talking about when you're running your ads, great, but make sure that you have the rights to use that image, okay? So, you know, you hear the words royalty free a lot. That's fine, as long as you read what rights you're getting, okay? Because sometimes they'll say like, yo, here's a license to use this image, but not for business purposes, right? You can use it in your creative leeway, or let's just say, you know, your own personal Instagram, you think it's cute, you want to write about it. That's completely different than using it in your advertising. So you want to be careful about stock images and what the licensing requirements are. And just this week, I read an article, there's a new scam going on. So basically they trick people into thinking that they can use this stock image, and they're getting the royalties or whatever, and then they're turning around and suing them for copyright infringement. Okay. So, and they're demanding money like, oh, here's our copyright registration. We're going to sue you for using that. Okay. So be careful. If you aren't sure, I mean, this goes with everything we're talking about. When you aren't sure, ask an attorney or ask an expert who knows. It's just not worth it. I know, like, when you're starting a business and you're trying to get going, that sometimes it can feel like, oh, I just don't have the money to spend. But this is a long-term play. Okay, if you're establishing a business, and your livelihood is a long-term play, so you just ask the right person. With copyright, be careful when quoting, right? You don't want to quote somebody else in a context that would be copyright infringement, which, you guys might have heard of fair use. And so are there ways that you can, there's ways that you can use copyrighted images, copyrighted words and text, copyrighted whatever, that is fair. But fair use is a super gray area, and you don't want to fall into the infringement side of it, okay? So a couple examples are parody, news, and criticism. So if you're like taking a picture of a celebrity and you're like, oh man, this girl looks drunk, right? You can repost it and criticize her for that. Or you can take a piece of an article and you can repost it to comment on it, right? And to say, look what happened, here's my opinion. And then of course, parodies, Saturday Night Live's the biggest example. They, use other people's music, and they do things to parody the copyrighted material. But they have a lot deeper pockets than most of us. So I would just say, be very careful if you're going to use somebody else's material. And one quick, way to do this, a lot of times, if you're just on social media and you want to share somebody's info because you like it, or like you want to support them, you can just message them and get their permission. If you say, can I share this, or can I repost, or can I use it, and they say yes, you're good to go, right? It's as simple as that. And I will just say this, I'm not doing a whole segment here on copyright, but just so you guys know, we'll talk a little bit more when we get into the contracts, but just so you guys know, the second that you create something, you guys have copyright protection over that. Now, that doesn't give you the rights to sue, but it does automatically mean that you own the copyright to it, okay? And same applies with anybody else who's creating something. As soon as they created that, they have a copyright. IP assignments, and we're going to talk about that in contracts. IP assignment is basically if somebody transfers you the rights to their copyright or to their intellectual property, then you can use it. But if they don't transfer it to you, you don't own it, okay? Even if somebody says, oh, I'm going to make this for you, and they send it over, you don't own it unless you have that IP assignment in place. So just be careful about that. And that leads me to the next topic, contracts. And I want to tell you guys, like, contracts are a good thing. Contracts do not have to be scary. They don't have to be intimidating. They're actually really good. They protect you, and they protect the other person who you're entering into an agreement with. So I know some business owners will tell me like, oh, I don't want to scare off my clients. But I think it's about your approach, right? Like, if you need the contract, and we're going to go into some more reasons why, but if you convey the benefit to your client as well, it's going to make them feel more comfortable. You're establishing legitimacy, like you're doing business with contracts like mature businesses should be doing. And two, you know what to expect. Everything's laid out here. There's no guessing, right? You know what to expect if something goes wrong because it's laid out there in the contract. And for online businesses, the number one contract I would tell you guys to get in place is a web designer agreement, okay? All of you guys are gonna have websites. Now, some of you guys might make them yourself, okay, but if you hire somebody to do a website for you, you need to have an agreement in place. This doesn't mean like, you can just pull it from LegalZoom and use it, right? It has to be a very specific contract in place. If you don't do this, you do not own your website, okay? There has to be IP assignment in your web designer agreement so that you can actually own all this content that the web designer is creating for you. Okay, that's the biggest reason why you really need that agreement in place. In addition, there will often be things about ADA compliance or GDPR compliance. And Ashlee touched a little bit about that. ADA is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And there's a requirement that your website be up to standards with that. So if somebody who was blind got on your website, they could use their software, which is basically robots, to read your website. And so if you have a picture of, you know, this keyboard and it looks like they're video conferencing on my slide here, it needs to say that in the alt text so the robots can read it and it can tell the viewer exactly, you know, what this image is of. And I know that sounds like kind of far-fetched, like, really, is there gonna be a blind person on my website? You know, how unlikely is that? But there are trolls out there. There's these like trolling lawyers who scam these and they file complaints against these websites or people who own these websites, and they make a quick buck because the way that the law is now, there's no like, oh, I'm a small business and didn't know, oopsie clause. It's just you owe a fine and that's that. I think it's like $10,000, but don't hold me to it, but it's definitely not something that you want to encounter. And so if the web designer agreement says, hey, we make sure everything's ADA compliant, well, that's fantastic. One, you have peace of mind. And two, if there was ever a dispute, you could potentially have a claim against the web designer agreement if they didn't do it, or against the web designer rather. And the other thing is GDPR, CCPA. These are privacy policy requirements. And so GDPR is a global regulation. It applies outside of the United States. But again, you're online, you are global. CCPA is California's kind of version of that. Only applies to Californians, but probably people in California are visiting your website, okay? Hopefully, right? Hopefully people from California are visiting your website because they like to spend money and there's a lot of people in California, okay? And then there's different regulations about children too with the privacy policy. So you wanna make sure that your privacy policy covers it. But also, you know, in your web designer agreement, you wanna make sure it touches on compliance, the ADA and GDPR. And of course your financial expectations too. Like I mentioned earlier with the SEO companies that were like, yeah, you know, we'll do a landing page for you. We have this strategy, you're gonna do calls right away, right? And then you're like, I don't have any calls, I want my money back. And I'm like, no, we did what we promised. Well, you know, where is the clause that explains what their duties are? If it's really all they're required to do, great. If they're required to actually prove something, well, you know what to expect because it was laid out in your agreement. But yeah, so that kind of combines with privacy policy too, right? If your web designer is not going to do it, which it's not really their job, but you want to know what their stance is, you need to get a privacy policy in place. It's a requirement. And you want to make sure that it actually covers all of the things that could happen and the people who could be visiting your website. Okay, so now the next thing is terms of service for your website or business. This really depends on what kind of business you're running. So if you have like an online business that's selling products, your terms are more going to be terms of use rather than terms of service. But if you're running a business online that's more of a service-based business and people can like, maybe they can purchase a course from you or something like that, you're going to want to have terms of service. And this just basically says, it just lays out the details and limits your liability. So especially if you have products, you know, you want to make sure you're limiting your liability as much as possible and you have all the right language in there. And then of course, and I can't tell you how many people overlook this. Of course, you want to have a contract. Every time you sell something, every time somebody purchases something from you, there should be a contract in place. Now, depending on what it is, it could be, you know, I have representation agreements for my clients every time they sign it. It's a few pages long. It's pretty in depth. but they're hiring me for legal services, okay? If you have something else, it doesn't necessarily have to be that long. Sometimes it could even just be bullet points, but you know, depending on what it was, you want to make sure you're covering everything you need to cover, including like if there is a dispute, what jurisdiction is it going to be in? You guys are dealing with people all over the place. So just because you might be in, I don't know, New York, if you're doing business with somebody in Arizona and they have a problem, they're going to try to sue you in Arizona unless your contract specifically says New York, because you don't want to end up having to fly to Arizona to defend yourself from whatever happened, right? You need to define that in the contract. You need to define how you're going to get paid. Is there going to be interest if they're late? What if they, you know, have a payment plan and they stop halfway? Do you refund them? You know, what's the recourse if you do have a dispute or if they fail to meet their end of their obligations? And really important is IP protection and confidentiality. Okay, again, the IP assignment depends on your business, right? But you want to make sure that if you need to give them an IP assignment, like if you're in Ashlee's situation where you're a web designer, you want to be giving up the IP that you're creating on behalf of the client, right? You want them to own it. That's why they're paying you, but you need to make it official. But on the other hand, if you're handing over a course or some proprietary information, you want to limit that too. You want to say, this is confidential. You can't reproduce this. You know, put as much of that kind of verbiage in there. So, you know, it's not one size fits all. That's true for contracts. It's true for marketing. It's true for most things that we're talking about here today. And just quickly, because we are so far over time, employee contracts and contractor agreements are two other really important ones when you get to that phase. And then operating agreements and bylaws. In most places, operating agreements are not mandatory for LLCs, but sometimes they are, and some places bylaws are mandatory for corporations. So you just need to know what applies to you and make sure that you have the appropriate in place, the appropriate agreement in place. Okay, you guys, I'm going to answer why can't I just use LegalZoom? I talk to people every single day who either are asking me why they can't use LegalZoom or they already use LegalZoom and they're calling me to fix their problem. Okay, LegalZoom is not a legal service. It is a fancy intake form with spell check, and sometimes the spell check's not even on point. And here's a quote from their own website. We provide an automated software solution to individuals who choose to prepare their own legal documents. At no time do we review your answers for legal sufficiency, draw legal conclusions, provide legal advice, or apply the law to the facts of your particular situation. If you can't just like not apply the facts to the law or it's totally irrelevant, you guys, I'm telling you, you're almost better off, you know, in a lot of cases you are better off trying to draft your own than using LegalZoom because at least you know the facts. But really, you got to invest into making sure you have a good contract. And the consequences, if you don't, are you could have an invalid contract that's just totally useless. You could be binding yourself to something that you didn't mean to, or failing to protect what you meant to do with the contract. If you don't have an IP assignment in place, you could lose your content, your intellectual property. You can expose yourself to lawsuits, fines, and damaged reputation. So again, just make sure you're taking it seriously if this is what you're going to be doing for your business and your livelihood. And nothing is one size fits all. So take what we said, and I think since we're at the end, we'll be taking questions. Excuse me. I talk so much, I'm losing my voice now.
Yes, we do have a few questions here in the chat. The first one is, if we are promoting upcoming events and in the case of an emergency or something happens, how and when do you cancel that without consumers not trusting you afterwards? So how do we cancel something without losing trust of our customers? And I think that's a good question. And honestly, we're all human. And I think that is something that most people understand. And so from a branding side of things and creating that customer, loyalty, I would personally send a personal email to whoever registered for my event and just say, don't do it through mass email blast or anything like that. If you can, send a personal email and just say, hey, something came up and, I need to cancel this and reschedule this. Like, thank you for, understanding. Obviously in much better terms than that. But again, everybody's human. And I don't think that a one-time thing is going to, make somebody not trust your brand anymore. Now, if it is a constant thing and they think maybe that you are doing it to just gain their email and you're continuously sending them email blasts afterwards, that's a completely different story. But if it is truly, just a freak accident or, something along those lines, then you'll be totally fine. And unless they're an unreasonable person, you probably won't have an issue. And realistically, it's probably not somebody that you would want to work with anyways, if they, can't understand that even brands have a little human side to them as well. So
I think that's a really great answer, and I agree. And, it goes back to what we talked about earlier about just continuing to be genuine, putting it in a tone that is you and is realistic. And if you're being consistent, they're going to forgive you, right? If you're out there giving value every day, if you're posting on your social media every day, people aren't going to hold it against you. They might be disappointed. You want them to be disappointed, right? That means they were looking forward to it, but they won't be holding it against you because you had to cancel something because something came up.
Absolutely. So another question that we have is, do I need to trademark my LLC?
That's a great question. So it's kind of hard to understand exactly what you mean by that question, but you need to trademark whatever name you're using outwardly. So if you're using the name of your LLC, like if Ashlee's Business Summit Collaborations LLC is the name of her LLC, then yeah, she needs to trademark Summit Collaborations because that's what she's putting out. But your LLC doesn't necessarily match with the trademark that you're using outwardly. So you don't have to trademark your LLC if it's not what you're using outwardly in the marketplace. But that said, just having the LLC doesn't give you any protection over that name. I mean, it means that no one else can get that name in your state as an LLC, but that doesn't mean it's not going to stop them from actually using that name. Like if somebody wanted to use Summit Collaborations here in Florida, they could just open, John Smith LLC and then just do business as Summit Collaborations. And the real person who has the right to use that is the person who has the superior trademark rights. Okay, so just keep in mind that your LLC name is kind of irrelevant when it comes to trademark protection.
Awesome. So clearly I need to get on my trademarks, huh?
I know we're working on it, you guys. So I had a question for you though, Ashlee, when we were talking. How do we know what hashtag to search on Instagram? So you mentioned like we can search them and we can reach out to those people for kind of organic social media outreach. How do we know what hashtag?
Yeah, so a lot of people will go out and, for a marketing agency, they'll go out and search for hashtags marketing agency. And you kind of are drawn toward the things that your business is. But when it comes down to it, the only person, sorry guys, this is what working from home gets you. The only person searching for a marketing agency is a marketing agency. So you don't want to search for something that you would search for as your business. You want really who your target audience is and what they're interacting on. So for me, I might search something along the lines of new business owner, or maybe, if you have a hair salon, you might want to search somebody that's hashtag new hairdo. And they're not going to need your services immediately, maybe, but it's just somebody that that gets their hair done, that takes care of themselves, that might need your services in the future. So really try to focus on what your target audiences would be interacting on. Again, if you're a brewery, hashtag I love beer. Like those are the people that you want to be interacting with. Also think locally. If you are a Tampa-based business, then you like Eric and I are, then you would want to search for things like maybe Tampa Bay real estate or Tampa Bay business owner, something along those lines. You also want to interact on a mix of hashtags. So don't just go after the ones that have millions of followers or posts to those, because you're going to get lost in the shuffle. There is just too many people posting all of the time on those. And so you'll want to use a mix of those, but also get some that are in the lower thousands, because that's really kind of where you'll get more people that are interacting, and you'll make a little bit more of a dent there.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah.
Did we have any other questions?
We do. What if my web designer has their own contract? Good news, guys. Erica does my contract. So, but what if your web designer is somebody else? Like, what then if they have their own contract?
Yeah, that's super common. A lot of these web designers are creatives, right? Like they're creating a website because that's their skill set, but they don't even have the legal knowledge either. So if they have their own, well, that's great. You don't have to draft one, but you do want to make sure it has those things that we talked about. Most importantly, the IP assignment. You want to make sure whatever they're creating on your behalf is yours. Contracts are always something that are negotiable. If you go to your web designer and you're like, look, I don't really like this, or could you explain this to me? And they tell you no, don't work with them. I mean, that's a major red flag. I know some things aren't negotiable. I have a clause in my representation agreement where if I have to do work that's outside of the scope of our agreement, even though it's a flat rate fee, that I have the ability to charge them out. I've never used it. I've had people question me about it. I'm not taking it out because it's there to protect me, but I'm happy to explain it and take the time and say, this is why we have it in there. But what the things that should be non-negotiable for you as the person who's choosing the web designer is the IP assignment. You got to have the IP assignment. And then you want to at least address like what's going on with ADA and GDPR. And if they say, we don't mess with that, we don't know, okay, that's fine. But you should at least know, because you're going to be the one on the hook if they're not making your website ADA compliant. And if they don't know what ADA compliance is, they're probably not making it compliant. And then the other thing is you want to make sure you know what the expectations are. What are they providing you exactly? And in exchange for the money that you're giving up, right? And that kind of goes for any contract, but you want to make sure it's clear. And like you said, contracts are really good, like for all the parties involved, right? It makes expectations more clear. And in addition to, the other benefits, like making sure you own your website.
Awesome. And last question, again, thank you guys so much for staying on with us through all of these. I know it is much past the time, but the last question was, the audience personas are really in depth. How do I create one by myself? So if you're already in business, you can get, or, whether you have a website or a social media platform already, if you've been posting and interacting with followers or getting traffic to your website, you should have the ability to gather those analytics. So it's super important that when you do set up a website, if you don't have it already, to also set up things like a Google Search Console and Google Analytics. And that way you have traffic data. And then on your social media platforms as well, those kind of insights are automatically built in for you. So if you're already using those things, then you can gather that data from your current client avatar directly from that. That doesn't mean that's who you want to be marketing to. If your current client avatar is somebody that's maybe not fitting the mold that you were hoping for, but it is a place that you can gather information. If you don't have any of that, then really it's just a lot of research involved, and it is very time consuming, but most importantly, it's just knowing what questions to ask and kind of what triggers, to research. So there are a ton of research papers out there and a ton of brand studies and marketing studies out there that will give you data about consumers. And so really, again, it's just figuring out what things to research. Also, there are programs out there. I'm sure that there are some free ones. The one that we use is not free. And so we use SEMrush, and that's something that you as an agency or a person can pay monthly for to get access to. And then when you have access to something like that, it'll actually not only pull data and traffic insights from your own website, but it will pull from your competitors competitors as well. So, you know, we can see anything any business has run on a national scale in terms of Google advertising. I can see anybody that goes to their traffic, how much website traffic they get, what kind of, you know, audience they have, who backlinks to their website. There are a ton of things that you can do with different platforms like that, if either, you know, you're working with an agency or a person, or if you are willing to spend that money yourself and buy those insights. So
I would say also, like, don't be afraid to just do it, right? Like, for me, oh, every business owner needs a trademark, right? That's my ideal client avatar, but no, that's not true. You have to really narrow it down, and who are you focusing on? That doesn't mean that you can't have multiple avatars with different strategies behind each of them, but you know, you can't just say like, yeah, I apply to everybody, because again, it's not one size fits all, and yours is not the same fit for everybody out there who could use a lawyer in my example, or who could use a marketing agency in Ashlee's example. Um, so thank you, Ashlee, for that. And I would love to invite you guys to connect with us. If you have any other questions, feel free to email me, Erica@DiAngeloLaw.com, or Ashlee at summitscollaborations.com. You can also find us on all the social media outlets so we can support your online business as you get going. My handle is DiAngelo Law on Instagram. It's pretty much DiAngelo Law wherever you go. And Ashlee, I think yours is Summit Collaborations everywhere as well, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us, DM us, whatever you want to do, and we'll be happy to answer that.
Thank you guys again. We hope you have a great rest of your night, and good luck in all of your business endeavors.